Good evening, everybody. Nice to see some faces we haven't seen in a little while.
Question about what I've kind of picked up people saying, and I'm just curious as to whether this is something that is typical, or I've been hearing the word like mushy, like mind turning into mush, and for me, I thought that in noticing, it's actually making the mind sharper or clearer. And so there's that quality. And then there's also just letting the mind, just being with what is. So I know there's no recipe or prescription, or, but I'm curious about what's happening to people and if this is something to look for.
Yeah. Well, there's only one thing that's important, and that is to be with the actual presence of reality as it is. And there's an infinite range of apparent modes that it can present in. So it can seem to be many, 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 many different ways, which can be analogized in all sorts of ways, some of which might include mush. But, the point is to be with it as it is and to discover what it is that is all these apparent ways, and that what it is transcends any of these ways that it appears to be. And then you are discovering what this is, what you are, through and beyond and inclusive of however it seems to be, whatever superficial characteristics seem to present themselves.
So is that the seeing or the recognizing or the recognition or viewing or seeing that happens when the mind kind of disappears?
Yeah,
so
maybe.
That you're not engaged in your mind, but then there's like more of a field awareness of awareness.
Well, it can be like that, but I wouldn't characterize it specifically like that. What makes it most difficult to recognize what's actually present is our preconceptions of what it is, which act like filters, so we only notice certain portions of it and we stop looking beyond a certain point. So we notice a certain aspects, certain characteristics of what is present, and we only notice to a certain level of fineness, let's say, or a certain level of detail, and then we stop, and so we're dealing with a superficiality that seems to be something relatively specifically. Because we think we know what it is, we're believing it to be a certain way, and we're believing that that is the case. So once we find that, we stop looking, we stop investigating, which, it stops, it doesn't actually stop, but it effectively stops any ability to recognize what this actually is, because what this actually is always inclusively transcendental of, yet inclusive of, the ways that it presents itself, the ways that it appears. And it's, for the recognition to occur, it's important to get to that transcendence, to be with the very specifics of what is present, but be with the way in which the specifics transcend the more obvious characteristics that seem to present themselves. Because what this is uncharacterizable, and yet it presents itself as all characteristics. So you have to go to actuality of present characteristics, and discover in those characteristics that it's intrinsically uncategorizable, which you can't do if you just stop at a certain point. You see characteristics and you stop, you shut down and say, oh, this is this, I'm seeing, because you're defining what it is and closing the door on noticing what more it is, and in the moreness is the revelation of transcendence. Transcendence is the important thing to get to. And fortunately, transcendence is actually present, so it's easy to do relatively, because that's what liberates, that's what enables you to discover that things are not limited, things are not containing, things are not in any way impediments or constraints in any way. And you discover that this is unlimited, you are unlimited, concretely, right here, right now, through seeing what this is that is present.
That stopping seems to be uncontrollable.
Yeah.
And it just...
Yeah. We typically, it's easy to, at a certain point of unfoldment, it's easy to just be very credulous with your belief systems and just assume things actually are the way you think they are. And so, of course, once that's verified in your experience, you stop, you just stay with that. And then it becomes a self-verifying feedback loop where you're experiencing things being what you thought they were, and they are what they thought they were, and you stop there, and you're sitting there, and you're basically essentially stuck. And you cut yourself off from discovering the inherent and intrinsic unstuckness that all this actually consists of. In the detail, in the nuance, in the indeterminacy that all specifics actually consist of.
Well, that gets back almost to that, not the mushiness, but the kind of letting your mind be, well, I've been thinking about you saying, okay, everyone tries to stop the mind, and that's not the point. So the mind is going on, but there's another level that is not the mind, that can see the mind, or see it in its place. It's like another realm.
Yeah.
So until that happens, I mean, you are in your mind.
Well, that's always happening. That's always happening. It's a matter of noticing that that's happening. That's not something that happens and then sometimes doesn't happen. Experience is always of more, but we may not be noticing it's of more, so we're noticing. Just think of the analogy of sitting in a room with a TV set and getting sucked into it. The TV is not the only thing in your experience, but if you let yourself get sucked into it, you're gone. It may as well be, because that's analogous to what happens when we let ourselves get sucked into our mental narrative or our mental interpretation, which of course usually happens unconsciously. So once it happens, you don't notice it's happening. That's your reality. That's your frame of reference. But even when that's your frame of reference, it's not your actual frame of reference, and an actual transcendence is in fact always present. So it's always available. But you have to have the, karma, luck, wherewithal to somehow stumble onto that fact, But this happens all the time. The opportunity for that is always present too, because even our obsessiveness with our narrative is very inconsistent. We're jerky, we're jumpy. It's not, it's not internally consistent, we're really bad. We're not very skilled at keeping a focus. We sort of drift off continually. And in that drifting off, you drift off away from the focus, and once you're away from the focus, all bets are off. But again, you still do have to have the wherewithal to somehow stumble onto taking advantage of that fact. And this is what, maturity or luck or karma brings to it. You have to find yourself in a situation where that does actually happen from time to time. And then all this stuff becomes meaningful for you. Until that point, it's just theoretical. But if you have had that in your experience, even if it's not something that happens regularly, then that indicates that you are at that point in your unfoldment where this does become relevant for you. And again, even if you're at a relatively, call it arbitrarily earlier point, where that's more of an uphill battle or something, that's fine. But that's okay, because that's just the phase of it that you're engaged with, and it will inevitably increase, because that's downhill. That's where this goes. This goes to recognition of itself, and once it's starting to recognize itself, is a sure symptom that that process is engaged, and it will continue to do so more and more deeply over an arbitrary period of time. Days, years, months, lifetimes, yes. Kalpas.
Excellent.
But unfortunately, there's no time, so it doesn't matter. It doesn't care.
I feel better.
Yeah.
Say more about focus. I haven't speak about focus before.
We talked about focus a little bit at the retreat. Focus is a spontaneous property of experience. Experience spontaneously has a tendency, a strong predilection to come to focus. And it typically does so very dynamically and very unstably. If you pay attention to your experience, you'll notice an unconscious, spontaneous focus coming, where you notice this and you notice that and you notice this and you think of something and you feel something and you hear something, and your focus is sort of dancing around. And the principle of focus is a kind of a giving higher importance to a certain portion of an arbitrary experiential field at the expense of giving the rest of it less focus. Less importance. And this is a spontaneous tendency, a spontaneous, tendency of reality itself to do so. But it doesn't mean anything. Just because something happens to be in focus within your experience doesn't mean it's particularly important. And there's several points which are very useful and powerful. Just because something's in focus doesn't mean that the rest of the field has gone away, A. B, just because something is in focus doesn't mean it's actually more important than the rest of the field. So rather than focus being something to struggle with, focus is something you can relegate to complete unimportance, because it doesn't actually, even though it's seeming to change the relative importance, the relative presence of things, it doesn't actually. So you can just let it go and not worry about it and just consider it as an arbitrary dynamism of reality.
Or just notice that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, notice that. I mean, noticing focus is a good way to notice the energy that, you've heard me many times, of course, call this radiance, which implies that it's energetic, it's positive, it's dynamic, it has an intrinsic pressure, an intrinsic creativity, an intrinsic whatever. And this focus is an aspect of this. This focus is being done by that primal energy. So just noticing focus is being with this potency on a very primal level, because it's being done by the radiance itself. It's the radiance itself that does focus, that's showing up as focus. So in that phenomena, you are being with a very primal, it's as primal as the basic phenomena of apparition, the fact that anything's appearing at all, which is, of course, the basic positivity, the basic dynamism of the radiance. It accounts for the radiant portion, the radiance aspect of the radiance, that it's even showing up.
So when focusing happens and the feeling that I'm doing the focusing, you notice those two things happening at the same time.
Uh-huh. Right.
I mean, the thinking that I'm doing it and it happening.
Right. Well, it happens, but the thinking that I'm doing it is a pure fantasy. You're claiming it, just like you're thinking, oh, I'm thinking. Yeah, right. If you're thinking, stop thinking. I guess I'm not thinking. Thinking is happening, and I'm designating, I'm owning it. I'm saying, yeah, that's my thinking. I'm doing that. It's like, yeah, right. I'm making the sunshine, you know. I'm making gravity pull. Well, what you are is what's thinking. What you are is what's focusing, but it's not you in any simple, personal, human sense. So in a profound sense, it's true that you are doing the focusing. See, to discover the way in which that's true, and that's another way to actuality.
The way? Discover the way.
See the way in which you are doing the focusing. Because what is doing the focusing is what you are, in actuality. It's not a little you, or a human you, or a you that's in a body, or a you that was born or died, but it's the actual you. It's the actuality of what the notion you refers to, because it's the only thing that actually is, it actually exists. All the other aspects of an imputed you that the word you could refer to are fantasies, so of course there's nothing there. I mean, I am this presence here. I am, obviously, I'm what I always thought I was. I'm me, I'm this, I'm here I am, this is me. That's absolutely true, but look at what it refers to. It refers to this actual presence, right? It doesn't refer to a body anymore. I mean, the body is just as present as that wall is present, as these thoughts are present, as anything that is present is present. And yeah, that's me. But it's not a body, it's not a human being. It doesn't exist in time, it doesn't exist in space. It's what it actually is, this presence right here. And it's not any different than it ever was. It's just a matter of seeing what you've always... when you say I, what is it you've actually been referring to all this time, you know? I mean, get specific. Instead of being vague about it, yeah, here I am, this is me. What exactly do you mean? Oh, you know, me. Yeah, me, but like, be precise. Find what this me refers to. And, you know, it is this actuality that is present here, you know?
I know it to be a feeling.
Sure, it's definitely a feeling.
I feel it in a supposed body.
Sure.
And it moves around.
Yeah.
And I always know it adds that particular feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm looking at it as just a feeling. And that is not me, but...
Well, and look at any feelings that you're holding to be not you, and look at a feeling you're holding to be you, and see if you can find an actual meaningful difference between them. Is there actual is there actual evidence? Is there hard evidence to say this is categorically different than that? Just because you're used to saying this feeling is a me feeling.
It's the me feeling.
Yeah, the me feeling.
Yeah.
When you look at the sunlight, you feel me, don't you? You feel like, yeah, this is me. But does the this that is me have a boundary? Does it have a line? Does it have a dotted line where, okay, this is where it stops, and then everything else is not me? I mean, the me feeling is very obvious, but can you find a not me feeling that is equally obvious, that is equally verifiable? I'm not refuting the me feeling. The me feeling is the real thing.
Oh, it is.
Absolutely. When you feel you are, you are.
Yeah.
But try and find where that ends. Try and find something that's as clearly not you as the you is clearly you. And I don't think you'll be able to do it if you're with it openly, if you're with it skeptically, if you're with it without holding it to be something, if you're with it without already thinking you know the answer, just be with, okay, let me find, okay, here's me, I can feel me, that's obvious, that's easy, it's a done deal. So let me find some not me and feel what that feels like, just as it is. And okay, is there like a moat? Is there a dividing line? Is there a no man's land? Is there a wall? Is there a barrier? Is there a dotted line? And I'll be surprised if you find anything. But play with it yourself.
Well, I've had that feeling. It lasted a couple of seconds where I was terrified because I thought I was all alone. I knew I was alone.
Well, you are all
I
alone.
know I am.
But you're everything. You're everything, so that's not actually a problem. You're all alone, but you're not separated from anything. You're alone, but everything comes with you. You're not alone nothing, you're alone everything.
Yeah.
Which kind of has a whole different feeling than loneliness.
Seems like the closest you could come to feeling not you is just kind of feeling the abnormal version of you. And then I guess maybe you could falsely say that that's a non-you feeling, but I guess you're still feeling it.
Yeah, but I mean, again, you feel if you look for a basis for actually differentiating, you can't find it. It just turns out to be something you're identifying with or defining into existence. But in the feeling itself, it's present in the same way, so you can't, And is there really a normal you?
Well, I've had situations where I didn't like what was going on for any number of reasons, and I wouldn't do my normal reaction, but just kind of sit with it. And sometimes there would be a shift where I'd go from irritation one moment to, I don't know if bliss is too strong a word, but it's just like all of a sudden there was no problem. It was just like a whole different way of seeing the same thing.
Right.
My perception had shifted. So when you were talking, before about we can't know what anything is, we have preconceptions.
Yes.
When these, I have this preconception, and I don't like what I see,
Right.
and just to sit with it, I've seen it just totally change. Like, oh my God, how did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, a very, very simple formula is that if you think you know what anything is, that's not what it is. You're defining that into existence, which also includes all value assessments. Because to like something or dislike something, in a fundamental sense, you have to think you know what it is. And if you can't know what it is, how can you like it or not like it? You may now this does not include being attracted to things or repelled from things. There may be qualities or characteristics of energy that it's sort of like oil and water, where you find yourself moving in the other direction. But these conditions, if you see them as they are intrinsically amazing and astounding, and it's way beyond liking them or not liking them or thinking they're beautiful or ugly. They're just too weird when you see them as they are. But that doesn't mean you necessarily lose discrimination in the sense of appreciating appreciating the what's a good way to put this? appreciating the, I'll call it the karma of participation. So you don't need to participate in things that you are not drawn to, but you don't need to not like them or look down on them or have a value judgment about them, because in that case you're not dealing with the phenomena itself, you're dealing with your preconception of it. See what I mean? So when you see what anything is, it stops being what you thought it was. And it doesn't mean you're going to love it, go running towards it. I mean, you know, you see a house on fire, you may love it, but that doesn't mean you have to go run throw yourself in it. Maybe you want to, and that's cool. But
Well, I think
short back.
I think it would be hot.
Yeah, hot. You're right. Good point. But fundamentally, yeah, you know, if you're having a value judgment about something, then that indicates that you have a preconception about it that you are unconsciously usually holding to be the case. And when you let go of that preconception and see what's actually there, it will completely transform in terms of what it seems to be to you.
Well, I had, the other day I would send out an email to a few friends of something I thought was cool. And I got this email back from this guy. It was just like, he was like livid, accusing me of, you know, having my head in the clouds and blah, blah, blah. And my first reaction was to write an email and say, well, you know, what you're saying about me, I think it's what's true for you. And I didn't. I've been sitting on it since. And as I sit with this, without responding, it seems to be unfolding in some mysterious way, where I'm starting to see it differently.
Sure. Everything is because, you know, this is intrinsically dynamic. This is intrinsically not static. So any presence whatsoever, any experiential presence whatsoever, will continually and unstoppably unfold and mutate and morph and develop into otherness, and never-endingly, always, you know, just like dropping a drop of ink in water or something. It just goes, you know. And everything is like that, so.
There's a certain advantage to not immediately jumping on it, but just let it.
Sure.
So I was, Jeff and I were sitting around and talking the other day, and I thought came to me like, oh yeah, you know, in a certain way, it's like, I feel like sort of nothing can actually describe me. I mean, I'm so far back. It's like being the king. I'm so far back that nothing could ever even reach me, no matter what radiance is going to come up with. It's not going to do it.
Yeah.
And it's just sort of like, oh yeah, that's weird, huh?
Yeah, descriptions always stop at superficialities.
Yeah.
And there's endless layers of superficiality, and you never get to primacy, which is ultimate, because it's ultimately transcendent. And yet the radiance is that. You are that.
Yeah.
So even though you are unending specifics that can arguably be talked about, albeit inaccurately, you're also more than that. You're always more than that, and that cannot be talked about.
Yeah.
That can't be described. So you can't know what you are. You can't know what anything is in a definitive sense.
Right. Yeah.
It can't be said. It can't be, you know, indicated.
That was funny. It's sort of like I was looking at the outside, so to speak, and all of a sudden it just flipped around, and I thought, oh, the outside's never going to contain me.
Yeah, totally.
It's like if you find out you were royalty or something, you didn't earn it.
Yeah.
It's just somebody said, oh, you're royalty. Oh, really? You know?
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of like, oh, wow, that's really weird. Nothing is, it's really this odd feeling. But you're the radiance too, and the radiance is beyond itself too.
Yes, the radiance is beyond itself. I mean, that's the whole kicker. That's the real PowerPoint in all of this, is that the radiance is intrinsically transcendent, and you are that. So when you see that, whatever and however you are in terms of the specifics of your manifestation, you're intrinsically and always and inevitably inconceivably more than that.
Right.
And no matter how huge a set of your characteristics you include, you're still intrinsically and inconceivably more than that.
Yeah.
And that's just the empirical fact. And because that is the fact, that is the case, it's discoverable. And it's got a kind of nice implication in terms of liberation and unstuckness and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Right. It's sort of like, well, am I anything before Rigpa, let's say, or before the radiant presence? Or is the radiant
there's no
presence
before.
the whole thing right there?
There is no before.
That's what I thought.
Radiant presence is infinitely transcendent.
In and of
You know,
itself.
radiant presence is the absolute.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
You know, it's not radiant presence actually. I mean, radiant presence is a kind of a trick,
Yeah.
is a way of trying to discover what it is.
Right.
But radiant presence transcends being radiant presence.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so I mean, anything you could think of, I mean, you could say the galaxy is my mood ring.
Totally, yeah.
You
If
know, like
not
it's-
even that.
Yeah,
It's
not
a-
even that.
It's
It's not even a gift there.
it's a speck of dust on a speck of dust on your ring.
Yeah, it's really odd.
Yeah, odd is a good word for it. Odd is a supreme understatement.
Yeah, it's funny because I kept thinking to myself, I'm the small part in this whole big thing, and then all of a sudden it flipped, and I went,
Yeah.
whoa,
No, you're the bigness.
I'm the big thing. I mean, this thing
Yeah.
is
This
gonna,
thing is the small part.
this thing is gonna like
Yeah.
keep doing like this, but it's never gonna reach me.
Yeah,
Well, it's never gonna reach itself.
yeah.
in the chance.
It endlessly spins off all these apparent smallnesses and all these apparent details and all these apparent specifics, but it's not contained by that.
Right.
And these things have no stability and really only a virtual existence. They aren't even really there if you look at it, and they're instantaneously gone, being replaced by more. So this unendingly is spinning off these apparitions of itself, but it's not contained by the apparitions. It itself is completely transcendent. Not that it's somewhere else.
Right. Yeah.
It's right here, but there's no here. Here is another one of the apparitions that it spins off. Like when you dream that you're on the edge of the Grand Canyon, there's no actual space there because it's a dream.
Right.
But that apparition of space is just an apparition that the dreaming endlessly spins off. And likewise, space and time and all these characteristics that are so apparent right here are just the effortless spin-offs, the partial presentations of this actuality and all of these specifics don't capture it. They're just spin-offs.
Yeah. Right.
They're like flashes. They're like if the diamond in the sun generates all these flashes, and so there's space, there's time, there's a body, there's a lifetime, there's all these flashes appearing, but they aren't the diamond, and the diamond isn't contained in the flashes.
Yeah.
They just appear as a result of it.
Right.
So all this very concrete apparition appears as a result of this actuality, which is this right here, this transcendental radiance.
Yeah, it seems like the transcendental radiance is now trying to explain to me what I am all the time, you know?
Oh, yeah.
It's like, okay, but it's sort of like, you know, I made that radiant presence my bitch.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it can't do it. It can't totally do it.
It endlessly spins off versions of itself. Endlessly. But the versions are not complete, and the versions don't contain it. They they embody aspects of it, they reflect aspects of it, but tiny, tiny little aspects that are not at all comprehensive or inclusive.
Yeah.
And the aspects don't actually contain it, don't limit it in any way.
Right. It's always doing this explanation thing to
Yeah.
you. But in a beautiful way. I mean, I hope it explains a lot more, but I don't really give a shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. No, that's what it is. Yeah, no, it's just astounding.
So like an infinite regression of supersetting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
But it's the same for everybody.
Yeah.
that's what this is.
Yeah, it's the same for
There's
everybody.
only
Whether you know it or not.
there's only one phenomenon, that generates literally endless apparent variation, but the variation never departs from the root actuality.
Right.
And does not limit or contain the root actuality.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because it's just the smallest little intuition that just like changed. I mean, a lot of things will change. I mean, that's part of the radiance too. But
Yeah.
I was funny because we were just
Yeah.
talking along and I said, oh, yeah, right.
Yeah.
So Peter, I've been working a bit with vibration,
Mm-hmm.
and at nighttime seeing the vibration because it's easier to see it then.
Uh-huh.
But I haven't been able to sense the detail of the vibration that I see like at nighttime out here. So
Uh-huh.
it's very fine tuned out here. I guess you probably.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is that the same thing that's going on out here? Just all
Yeah.
the vibration.
Yeah. In sort of waking condition when your, let's say your detail awareness is turned up, the vibration is a very, very fine, very high frequency, so it's not really apparent. It's like a rather than so it's not like gross movement or big dynamism that you can see typically. So you have to kind of recalibrate. You can an interesting way to do it. I don't know if you ever have the time, but sometime if you're ever up before dawn, sit where you can look out a window in the twilight, and everything will still be kind of have that darkness vibrating thing, and then watch as the light increases, as it gets sharper and sharper and more sort of detailed, focused, like a more of a waking state, a daytime level of detail and level of precision focus. And yet, even though that characteristic of it grows, it doesn't actually qualitatively change. So you discover the way in which those two are degrees of each other. But everything vibrates essentially. Everything there is absolutely zero stasis. There's nothing that actually has any persistence, any duration, or any non-movement. No, let's call it non-dynamism. You can just notice the refresh rate of the present moment. I mean, there's your vibration. Just look at, the way what you're experiencing now is changing now. Just instantaneously, literally instantaneously. It's hard to get a much faster rate of vibration than that, and that's always the case. You can just, we're not used to noticing that. We're used to sort of noticing the seeming continuity or the relative continuity of experience through the present moment. But you can actually notice how experience becomes new now. And how fast does that happen? Well, I can't answer that question because it's no time at all. And so right there, bang, it's like, wow. There's a dynamism for you. And you can actually be with that. You can actually approach that and become aware of that. But it's all just aspects of playing with the same thing. You're basically being with the intrinsic dynamism of the radiance, the intrinsic. That is literally it's radiance. The radiance aspect of the radiance is this, inconceivable dynamism that it intrinsically is. There's no part of it that is not a dynamism. And, this is very concrete. It's just the dynamism of experience. Experience is, if you're sensitively aware of your experience, it's just constantly changing in every aspect. Everything is different now, always. With, instantaneous refresh rate. And the force that is doing that, the force that is enacting that, this actuality is the radiance, is what this actually is, what you actually are.
When you say experience changes every minute, I just got an insight, possibly, to what it's not like this wall moves from here to over there, or things that are static stop being what they are. Like the floor continues to be the floor.
Mm-hmm.
This is how I'm understanding. But what I call my experience of the floor is constantly refreshing itself.
Yes.
And that seems to be a new dimension to look at.
Yes. And there is no floor except your experience of it.
Yeah.
So
I'm sure I'm going to reverse and come back to that after. But
Yeah.
but first to see that there is a difference between what I call my experience and what I project as a floor.
Good. Yeah. Don't worry about whether or not there's a floor, because that's really a moot point. But do notice that it's about what you experience. Your experience is the object here, not the objects of or within experience. They may or may not be present, but don't worry about that. The point is, notice experience. Experience is the radiance, and notice the behavior of experience. Experience is very, very slippery. It's instantaneously and always morphing, always changing. There's absolutely no stasis in experience, and except for the fact that it never departs from itself. It always is nothing but experience, and that's unchangingly the case. But every aspect of its specifics as presentation is instantaneously and continually changing.
And is that morphing, by that frequency of morphing, does that run parallel with something like my sense of I? I'm a new I every
Sure.
every
It
split
doesn't
second?
run parallel with it, they're one and the same. But
Yes, but I'm thinking of them as different, and so they really line up. They're really
Yeah.
the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
I, me,
Yeah.
it.
Sure.
It's
Or thought, see, feel, identify. Whatever, sort of modes it is presenting in experience in all of its different dimensionalities of perception, thought, feeling, identification, subtle mental tendencies, whatever. It's all being done and redone in real time, with absolute dynamism. And an absolute discontinuity from what it was, but it's even though it's an absolute discontinuity, there is a degree of continuity which is very interesting.
So that does tend to erode the idea of a stable me.
Yeah. I mean, it'll throw it out the window if you really notice it.
Mm-hmm.
You'll notice that what is stable is what this is, but when you're with that as it is, it immediately and obviously, let's say it ultimately and obviously transcends conditions and transcends parts and portions and anything that's identifiable. And so right away you get that, oh, I am that, I am this inconceivable vastness, which is doing all this, which is presenting as all of this unending inconceivability. But it's all about looking at experience. Experience is the interesting condition here.
What's interesting to me is that experience and the experienced are the same thing.
Yeah.
And yet, if you stay with the experienced, you don't go anywhere.
Yeah.
And if you can make that division, at least intellectually, mentally, and focus, put your attention on the experience, then you become fluid enough to go somewhere.
Yeah. Because the objects of experience are literally defined into existence in our imagination, although we may not be aware of that. So the apparent stability and objectivity of something like this floor is actually just an imputation based on the fact of experiencing, which is not the floor. And yet there's sufficient detail, sufficient information to serve as a basis for the fantastic projection of, oh, there's an actual floor there, and it's actually stable, and it's not doing very much. I mean, its atoms may be vibrating, but it's basically just sort of sitting there, and it's inert, and it's objectively existing, which is only a fantasy that exists in your consciousness.
Mhm.
It doesn't exist in the floor, because the floor is just an experience.
Well, I can see a shimmer on the floor.
Yeah.
And I've never really been able to align with what you're saying about it's completely refreshing itself every instant.
Yeah.
Shimmer and all.
Yeah, because the experience is refreshing itself, and
So
the floor is nothing other than that instantly, constantly refreshing experience.
Mhm.
Why are you calling it a floor then?
It's a name. Because it's doable. It's a name. It's a designation for an arbitrarily definable aspect or set of aspects within experience. And even though that set has no actual identity or actual integrity or coherence, still in all the intelligence is powerful enough to do that. So we can designate all the objects. We designate people and floors in a room and house and the sun and the dog barking and a glass of water, and we can designate all these things. Even though they don't exist as such, they exist as designations within this infinite field of inconceivability. And even though there's no objects there that have coherence or stability or objective existence, still in all, the intelligence is powerful enough to do this effortlessly and meaningfully. And we all know it. So you can walk out to your car and drive home, even though there's no car and no home, because what there is corresponds sufficiently to being a car and a home for that to be doable. But it's not actually that, and if you notice it's not actually that, you're not trapped by it. It's like a dream. It's just like a dream. In a dream you can say, oh, I had a dream last night, and I walked up to this guy, and I was talking to him, and he took me to this building, and we went to the building, and I got into a blimp on top of the building and went for a cruise. It's like, yeah, but it was a dream, so there was no guy, there was no building, there was no blimp, and there was no cruise.
There's no you.
But you can talk about it in those terms, because the intelligence is powerful enough to designate the groupings of these qualities that showed up experientially as the dreaming in this way. But the trick is to notice that it's not actually like that. But that doesn't mean you need to stop doing the designating. Just notice that the designating doesn't create actual conditions or objects. You're actually referring to inconceivabilities. So we can talk about all these objects, but that doesn't make them objects. They're actually in just radiant presence. I mean, that's why thinking is not a problem, because thinking is busy doing exactly that. Thinking is really busy classifying and categorizing and trying to analyze environment and running hypothetical scenarios nonstop, and it ain't liable to slow down very much. But it doesn't need to. You just need to see what it is. You see that it is a categorization of something that's intrinsically uncategorizable, but the intelligence is powerful enough to partially categorize it anyway. And so there's no problem, because nothing is being limited, nothing is being created that's entrapping. It's all just hypotheses.
So the cosmic computer is rebooting itself every split second.
Yeah.
And if I look inward, so to speak, I would see that the I is rebooting itself, corresponding with that.
Yeah, all presentational phenomena, all aspects of presentation, all characteristics whatsoever on any level of subtlety.
But there's some level that doesn't seem to change.
What it is doesn't change. But what it is not its presentations. What it is that which is doing all of this presentation. It doesn't change. But it can't be found as an object. It can't be found as a thing. And yet it is a reality. It's the transcendental aspect of the radiance. The radiance can look like anything, but it never departs from itself. It never becomes anything other than radiance, and the radiance is this astounding transcendence. You know, I mean, in various traditions it's called Atman or God or the three kayas or this or that. It's the absolute condition, but it's not a thing. It doesn't exist in the category of things or of objects that are findable, or for that matter of subjects that are findable. It's because it's the absolute. You know, it's the alpha and omega. It's the whatever. You know, all you can do is sort of indicate it very vaguely and symbolically. And even though it is not findable, it also, or let's say not specifiable, it is completely knowable.
Right, you can sense it.
You can know that that's what this is. You can know the self. You can know the absolute, because this is it. Once you get over the expectation of finding it as an object, the absolute is that which generates and shows up as all objectification, but it doesn't. And the objectification is made of the absolute because there's no other substance around for it to be made of. But there's nothing here but the absolute. But all this presentation is not it. It does not capture it. Does not comprehensively embody or reflect it in any simple way. I mean, a simple way to say it is that which does not change is the absolute, but it's not a that.
You can never find
You
it.
are that.
Can't find it. But it never goes away, so you don't need to find it. Yeah.
Language is so inadequate.
And find implies that you lost something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or you're separate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You find yourself.
But the absolute aspect of this is no more or less what this is than all of the apparitional aspects of it. They're all one and the same. It's looking at the same thing, sort of from different angles, from different directions. It's not like all the presentations are somehow lesser phenomena, and the absolute is this mothership or something. It's like you're looking at the same thing, just on different. When you look at the specifics, you're looking at the absolute, just as specifics. When you don't look at the specifics, you're looking at the absolute, not as the specifics, or whatever, because there's nothing else to look at. So it's the same. There's no hierarchy of value or of fundamentality or anything. There's no hierarchy at all. Anytime you look at anything whatsoever is the absolute, but the absolute can be seen in myriad ways. It can be seen as this myriad presentational characteristics on infinite levels of subtlety and infinite levels of transcendence, or it can be seen in terms of this the sort of the identity of what the non-identity of what this is that does not depart from. I mean, i.e. that which is always the same. Albeit that's actually the hardest way to look at it. I mean, in practical terms, you'll always hear me suggesting to go to the radiance. I don't suggest look for that which doesn't change it. Look for the self, because that's it's so easy to fall into the delusion that way, because it's so easy to manufacture some subtle fantasy that you say, oh yeah, that's it, because the absolute is not findable. You can't find transcendence, and if I say look for transcendence, the subtle tendency is you're going to create one. You're going to create a fantasy of one, which will be entrapping, because fantasies are entrapping. when you think they're real. So I always say go to the radiance, because the radiance is not entrapping because it's self-defeating. It obviously, first of all, it's very specific, so you can go to it. You can find it. I mean, the absolute, you can't find it, so how are you going to go to it? Again, without creating something.
Right.
I mean, that's my criticism of a lot of these sort of neo-Advaita teachings. Go find who's asking the question, find who's seeing through your eyes and all that thing. It's a subtle invitation to fantasy, because you can't find those things. Whereas I say, find light, and here's light. Okay, so it's actually findable. And then you can further, since it is findable, you can actually study it. You can look at it. It's something you can actually explore. And okay, so here's light. So what is it? How does it work? And all of a sudden, you discover its transcendence, and through that you get to the absolute, so to speak, through its presentation. And since it's all one and the same, it's not like that's a lesser path or something. I mean, it's a sort of left-hand path, right-hand path division that shows up in various traditions. If you go to the left-hand path, if you go to looking for the absolute in otherness, it's a lot easier, because otherness is you can study otherness. It shows up. There's something there you can actually, investigate. And of course, it's a moot point, because you end up ultimately finding the same thing, because of course, what's doing otherness is the absolute. And again, going to look for the absolute is an invitation to delusion.
I see two main advantages in what you're saying, as opposed to the usual way of, or at least the vital way. One is you end up creating something. You have to create something, at least a target to shoot at, and then that becomes too important, and you miss it. But the other is the carrot and stick thing. You have the idea that you're going towards something and it's not here in the present.
Yeah.
You're pushing it into the future.
Yeah.
You're redefining something out of nothing, and it's nothing, getting nothing for it. And then the other thing is you're putting it off in the future. You're never going to get there.
Yeah.
And number three, actually, there's a third one, isn't there? Because what you do as a third one is, why is that suddenly blocked out of my mind? The dark forces just took that out of my mind. It's very close. I said 3 and they just took it away.
I saw it happening too, in your face.
It just went out of my mind. Oh, the hierarchy of importance.
Yeah, it's easy to be seduced into that.
It's not available now.
Yeah.
It's a hierarchy of perception. I can see this, I can see this world, but I can't see that, and so therefore I have to do some sadhana to get so I can see that,
Right.
to purify
Right.
and see that.
Right.
So,
But that's a very elementary approach of Advaita. Not all Advaita is like that. It's very elementary, and very preliminary.
Yeah, whatever. Anyway, I don't intend to get into a discussion
No, of
of
course
the
not.
different approaches. I was just saying generically,
That's true of all religions.
Yeah.
They have this preliminary stuff
well,
of
it works.
hierarchies.
It works either way. I mean, the Buddhists or the Vedantins who fight like cats and dogs, it exists. It doesn't. It works either
Yeah.
way. But the teacher
Yeah.
has to save the disciple from the pitfalls.
yeah.
whichever-
Well, that's always the bottom line.
Without a teacher, you don't go anywhere.
Yeah.
Right.
But it always gets down. I mean, this is, real unfoldment, discovery, and realization is always an individual matter, and the process of coming to it is always one of overcoming pitfalls. Doing it wrong and doing it wrong and doing it wrong and being heavy-handed and being sloppy until you finally stumble onto how not to do that, with or without help. So it's a development of subtlety and artfulness and flexibility and ultimately intelligence in being able to be engaged with your experience less than stupidly. And
That's
ultimately,
interesting.
absolutely less than stupidly.
Not stupidly at all.
I really like the, who am I? Because when I ask that question, it's just, infinity opens up. Or I say, well, let me see if I can find myself. It's just same thing. It's just like spaciousness.
Good, yeah. Yeah, if you can do that and see the truth of it, that's great. I think for a lot of people, that's a
Oh, it took me a long time to get to that.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, they try and come up with an answer, even a subtle and grandiose and spectacular answer, but still it's an answer that is, essentially a fantasy rather than the actuality.
But that's missing the point.
Yeah, of course. Why don't we knock off for a little while and have one of our famous 15-minute long, 5-minute breaks?
There's watermelon.
There's watermelon.
Lots of it.
Watermelon, there's cherries, there's chocolate.
Be back shortly.
Pie.
Welcome back.
Did we go anywhere? Wow.
I'm just performing for the camera.
So, Peter, I am, just like everybody else is, that which brings this into being and makes this happen.
Yes.
Except you can't say it. So.
Can't say
it's
what?
more than that. Or you can't really say, well, you can't say what this is, but.
What you just said is
what
you just said is exactly true as far as it goes. You can't say what any terms of that statement actually means. So I am that which brings this into being. You can't say what I is, of course. You can't say what am is. So what is, isness. That, of course, is more I. That which. And to bring this into being, what does that mean exactly? Because every aspect of this and its functioning is transcendental. So whether or not there's anything to being brought into being is a question that can't be answered because it's intrinsically transcendental. Every step of the process, let's say, or of the mechanism of this is functioning. Every step is transcendental, i.e., unresolvable in terms of what it is or isn't. So, so a statement like that is absolutely true as far as it goes, but it's not definitive, it's not precise. So, I mean, the thing is less to say that and more to know it, know the truth of it. See that you have to be that because there's nothing else than it. There's nothing else than this phenomena. So, of course, if you are anything, you are it, because what else could you be? You are this, the world is this beer is this, anything is this, because this is what we got. So, and then see that, feel that, just know the absolute, undeniable, objective fact of that.
You couldn't possibly be a person or somebody with characteristics or history or any of that.
Yeah, ultimately because if you are that, then you are also what is doing that and what that comes from, what that actually is, which again, if you look, turns out to be this absolute inclusive transcendence. So everything collapses to that. Thanks. any step, any aspect of experience that you look at reveals this. So you can look where it's easy, like we were talking about earlier. Looking at I is typically a lot harder and more challenging because we have a lot of psychological baggage and it's also very tenuous and unfocused. But if you look at something that presents experientially as an object, it's seemingly more simple, more obvious, more explicit, so you can examine what that is, and what you find with what that is also what you will find with what I is, or anything else. So it doesn't matter where you investigate, just do it where it's easy, and what you find, wherever you investigate, will be what you will find anywhere else you investigated. So you want to know what God is, see what a chair is. You want to know what you are, see what a chair is. Or whatever. It doesn't matter. Because there's only one phenomena going on here. So if you investigate that phenomena, you will see what everything is. So the trick is to look where it's easy to look. There's a wonderful, I guess I've heard that it's a Sufi parable that superficially one gets wrong. What's his name? Mullah Nasruddin lost his keys, and so he was out. It was nighttime, so he was out on the sidewalk under the street lamp looking for his keys. And someone comes up to him and says, "What are you doing, Mullah? I'm looking for my keys." "Where'd you lose them?" "I lost them in the house." "Why are you looking out here?" "Because this is where the light is." And superficially, you think that's an example of look for stupidity. Look for things where you lost them if you want to find them. But actually, it's a very, very, very subtle point, which is what I'm talking about. And with reality, look where it's easy to look, and you will find your keys. So look. So you don't need to look in a special place because that's where you think that you'll find the special thing. Look in an unspecial, easy, obvious place because what you find there will be the special thing. And so look where it's easy to look rather than look where you think it is. Which is my recommendation in terms of, looking for subjectivity is liable to be challenged. And maybe not. I mean, for some people, maybe not. But from my way of seeing things, looking for subjectivity, looking for the I, looking for the self, looking for whatever, is liable to be more challenging because of all of our psychological baggage, our identification, what have you, and also the tenuousness and incoherence of what the phenomena is compared to a more explicit sensory phenomena, say, that is really obvious and accessible and clear and just present and doesn't have a lot of associated preconceptions with it.
I was thinking of that Buddhist saying, it was reported, Buddha said, well, when I became enlightened, everything became enlightened. Trees, rocks, everything. And I thought about that for a long time, like, what's he talking about? you know, and it's obvious that, I mean, the table's enlightened too in the floor.
Yeah.
Because it's all like
Yeah.
radiant presence.
Yeah, exactly. You know, you discovered that what the natural condition is intrinsically transcendental, and what we call enlightenment is just noticing that fact.
Right.
And everything already is the natural condition, so of course everything is enlightened in the sense that everything is transcendental.
Yeah, right, well said, yeah. I mean, all these ideas you have about yourself, well, I'm not this, I'm not that, or those are all just, you know, your ideas.
Sure, they're ideas, they're fine. They're not true.
Exactly.
They're not accurate, but no idea is, so who cares?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Peter, is what is meant as the right view? Is that what it's called? And so, Jim, this, I forget the term.
Well, in Dzogchen they usually call it just the view.
The view. Do you mean the view where there's not a sense of division, but it's like what you are is what I was saying, what this is? So
Yeah.
You are that. You are that happening.
Yeah, the view is this, that this actuality is itself intrinsically the absolute transcendence, and which by its very nature appears as all this without departing from itself, with no subdivisions or entities or what have you, and that the entire thing is intrinsically transcendental in the sense that it can't be found as anything or resolved as anything in any simple or subtle sense. So in other words, the entire thing is basically miraculously bootstrapped out of itself, out of nothing. Not literally out of nothing, but just out of inconceivability. So it's transcendent in the sense that there's no way to get a handle on it. But that as a concrete, the concrete actual fact of this immediate presence right here. And that's the Dzogchen view, which also happens to be actuality. So it's very simple. It's not like you need to remember anything. just be in actuality, and all of its characteristics become self-evident. And if they aren't self-evident, look, and you will discover them, and then they're self-evident.
It's interesting because there's an illusion or a kind of a thing made up in your head that if you look at something, then it is in focus. But if I look around the room, I can focus on like a pixel of something in the distance, but everything around it is absolutely insane, and then the thing that I'm trying to look at keeps moving around, so it's the same, it seems the same, but it's interesting because yeah, you just keep thinking that you can see something in focus.
Yeah, I mean, the way experience actually works is different than the way we usually think it does. And of course, again, if you look at your actual experience, then it becomes self-evident.
Yeah.
And you discover that things are a lot more slippery than we're used to thinking they are. And it's all completely explicit and obvious, so nothing's hidden, which is very convenient. So you can just look for yourself, and it's plain to see. So, fortunately, you don't need to remember anything. You don't need to learn any philosophy or remember any, esoteric notions that you have to, oh, I hope I don't forget that. I gotta remember that. It doesn't matter. There's nothing to remember. Just look at what this is, and it will show you what it is, and that's, it's lazy man's paradise. Drunkard's dream.
Do they have to believe?
One thing I notice is that thoughts are becoming more and more dreamlike.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because they are that intrinsically. And when we stop holding them to be accurate and true and concrete, it's very obvious and self-evident what they actually are, which is this astounding transcendental whatever, you can't say, this vibe or whatever, right?
There's so many different ways of explaining reality and talking about it. I mean, this is all Shakti. I mean, we've talked about how the intelligence misinterprets itself, and it's just, I mean, we could talk to the cows come home, and it's just like, this is what we have.
Yep. Just this here.
Yeah.
You know, that's the simplest thing. Just this here. Just be with this and let it show you what it is.
As it is.
As it is.
Like it could be something else.
Well, as it could be like a dream of thinking, well, what I'm looking at isn't what it is, it's something else. Which is, really, it's just the looking itself. Just looking.
Even though it's so easy because it's all right in front of us, why do you think sometimes we get tricked into superstition, like religious stuff and all that? Like,
Well, we've been indoctrinated in all sorts of explanations and beliefs about the way things are and what things are and so on and so forth. And there's a kind of a, you could say, an automatic skepticism or degree of maturity or something, whatever. And when you get to a certain point, you begin to question those things. And if you happen to not be at that point, then you may just sort of fall for those things and get sucked into them. And once you start to question them, there's still a long period of time where you tend to fall into these things. Or there may be some that you're holding that you're not even aware that they're there, so they're sort of very subliminal. Because the problem is most of these beliefs in interpretations are unconscious, so we don't know we're doing it. We just think that's objectively true. We think the way that we think things are is the way they actually are, and we're naively unaware that they're actually things we're believing. So, you know, we're forced to wait until our own natural maturity arouses some skepticism or some sufficient, doubt to make us say, wait a minute, what's going on here? There's something, this doesn't really hold water. There must be something more than this. And then we begin to become interested in all this stuff. We begin to scratch the surface. We begin to explore. All of which is just a symptom of this spontaneous self-maturing happening. And, it flowers into really usually a serious, hardcore, more or less crazed inquiry for most people. And ultimately it flowers into discovery of what this is, which of course turns out to completely transcend what we thought it was, completely be other than what we thought it was. But it's natural for this to misunderstand itself, which shows up as all these sort of interpretations or holding things to be various ways. This misunderstands itself, and it's aided by circulating entities that are embodied that are immersed in that misunderstanding, reflect and generate and echo these misunderstandings, and propagate them among other people. So you're immersed in a sea of misunderstandings. So it can be difficult in that context to find the wherewithal to say, wait a minute, because most people around you aren't saying, wait a minute. But fortunately, or you might say unfortunately, that does happen. At a certain point, this maturity spontaneously develops, and we begin to rebel. We begin to say, to not accept the party line, and to begin to say, wait a minute, I'm going to look into this. I'm not, just because you think that's true, just because I've been thinking that's true, doesn't mean it is. Let me check it out. And then we start, rocking the boat. But it's very easy for this to misunderstand what it is, because what it is so subtle and so transcendental. And at first it takes cheap shots. It takes the obvious approach. Say, well, let me just assume things are just the way they obviously look on the surface and not look any further. Like, okay. And so it does that for a while, and that proves to not be quite adequate. And so on and so forth. Because what there is here is so far beyond what these simplistic beliefs are that we hold they are. It's hard to imagine it's that far beyond. When you're with these beliefs, it's hard to imagine it couldn't be that far out. It couldn't be like that. That's like just too weird. It's got to be just some little thing. And so to really get the depth of how astounding this is, is challenging in itself, just because it diverges so profoundly from consensus reality.
I was thinking about this Christian idea that in Christianity they've got a sin called presumption. And the logical idea is, well, everything comes from God and is God. So if you presume you know what it is, it's like really far off, presumption. And it's like, presumption is just going on like all the time. I mean, it's like a presumption bazaar.
Yeah. No, that's a very profound understanding. Since everything comes from God, how can you get a handle on it?
Yeah, right, really.
That's right on the money.
I was thinking about what John was saying a couple of years ago when he said, "Oh, I just don't believe anything anymore." I see that.
Yeah.
The presumptions. I mean, the presumptions keep coming, but you don't have to buy them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the mind never-endingly generates interpretations of things, but they're hypotheses. You don't need to, buy them hook, line, and sinker as being true, as being objective. And when you see that, no way you can think about this is accurate, then it's obvious that any belief is absurd. Because you can't get a handle on what this is enough to believe anything about it. Anything you could define enough to believe, by the very fact that you can define it that much, proves that it's not the case, because what this is indefinable. Yeah. It's just completely, I say intrinsically transcendental, which sounds sort of elusive and theoretical, but in actual fact, I'm talking about very concretely transcendental. It's transcendental in the sense that it's weirder than weird. You can't find it. You can't resolve it. You can't make sense out of it. You can't grasp it as anything whatsoever. But again, that's just an empirical fact, so it's very easily discoverable and noticeable, and once you get that, it's very powerful. You know, the fact that is the case is really obvious and very powerful, and just really cuts the root of any tendency to believe things.
Well, that's the challenge in going to talks and satsangs and being a spiritual seeker, is that you can't really believe anything you hear. You have to prove it for yourself. No matter how astute maybe the teacher might be, you can't take it on their word.
Yep.
You have to own it and check it out.
That's right. You have to do the math.
It's funny because I still find myself living according to these presumptions in a certain way, you know.
Sure.
Keep doing activities like chanting and stuff. I know it's not, you know, it's just like.
But that's fine. You don't need to. It doesn't matter what you do. The point is to see what it is.
Right.
And you don't need to not. You don't. Even if there's no reason to do anything, there's no reason to not do it either.
Right. Yeah.
Because ultimately, all action is itself transcendental. I mean, why do you do what you do? Why are you who you are? Why are you drawn to what you're drawn to? Why do you seem to have the history that you think you had, and so on and so forth? I mean, all those things, all those questions are unanswerable, and they reveal the transcendental. Right. So, you know, in doing what you do, you're actually enacting the transcendental. Even if the explanations or descriptions that conventionally would go along with that are absurd, it doesn't matter, so who cares?
Right. Yeah. It is the transcendental itself
that
you're doing. So.
Yeah, of course. Even if it's some seemingly neurotic or absurd or ritualized behavior that has no point, it's like, well, nothing has a point, so you know, why split hairs?
Well, it's the assumption that some patterns are more important, somehow spiritual, because we tend to brush our teeth the same way every time. I mean, we just sometimes don't even remember that we did brush our teeth. So why would that be less important or less valuable in some way than getting up in the morning and chanting?
Sure.
It's the same thing.
Yeah. It's just you do what you happen to do because you are what you happen to be, and what that is inconceivable and ungraspable. So what you do is inconceivable and ungraspable. So there's no basis to criticize it or not.
Yeah.
It's just I don't know.
There's no way you can focus to even make a judgment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's just.
At best, just enjoy it.
It's all good. I mean, it's just radiance. Just see that it's all radiance, and all of a sudden, all that falls away. And on the, radiance is intrinsically good. You know, it's intrinsically divine, and so therefore, all activity is intrinsically divine. So have at it. So just do what you do. Do what you like. It doesn't matter.
But it's not as if we have a choice.
Of course not.
Everything just kind of like spewing out. And
of course, sure.
You know,
that's the radiance.
I mean, you said so many times that we just like there's no ownership.
Of course, yeah.
It's just all happening.
Yeah, it's all happening, and it's all you. It's all what you are. It's all transcendental, and none of it makes any sense anyway. So there's no basis to qualify it or try to criticize it, one way or the other. There's no basis for saying anything's good or anything's bad or anything's better or anything's worse, because it's all just too weird, to even go that far. It's just like...
Yeah, it's pretty easy to become flaky because when you don't, you don't assign meaning to anything. It's like you're just kind of like free fall.
Yeah, well, it works for me.
Yes, it does. That's why it keeps me around. That's why I keep him around.
But nonetheless, you have the level of functionality that spontaneously shows up anyway, and it's probably going to be pretty much the same level of functionality that you've ever had, because you are what you are, and you're not going to be different. You're not going to become different just because you see what you are. So, and it's not particularly, the level of functionality you have isn't particularly important. There are people that survive perfectly well with very low levels of functionality, so-called, and vice versa. So, what difference does it make? You just you just be as functional as you are, and it's all good. And
Yeah, I mean, because
it's workable.
I mean, one of the things that I notice is that I just kind of see all of this happening and watching it all happening, and even if I want to change something slightly, and it doesn't happen, it's like I'm not at the driver's seat.
Sure, of course.
So everything just keeps going on as it is.
Sure.
And it's, I don't have a choice in the matter.
Of course.
And it's inherently functional anyway, so.
Yeah. It's as functional as it is, and it's doing the functionality, and it is functional. It's going where it's going, So it's no problems. And it doesn't need to look one way or another, It can look like success, it can look like what someone would call success, it can look like what someone would call failure, it can look like what someone would call weird, it can look like what someone would call normal, and it just doesn't matter. Those are just arbitrary qualifications of something that's unqualifiable. So, it doesn't matter.
But one thing that does, at least in my experience, one thing that does happen is that the stories just kind of get less, and it feels like a more lighter actuality, as it were.
Yeah.
It feels lighter, but the stories just kind of.
Yeah. When you begin to notice the radiance more, then it's obvious that your interpretations are not particularly accurate, and so your investment in following along with them because it seems important to do so falls away, dissipates, and so it all gets lighter. It's not going to necessarily stop. The mind may continually generate interpretations, and to some degree you may be following them, but it has no particular importance. There's nothing hangs on it, because the more you come to see the radiance, the more you come to see it's doing itself, it's doing everything, it's going to do what it's going to do, and you can't say what that is anyway. You can't control it. I mean, everything about it is just gone. So, you can't get a handle on assessing it or criticizing it or thinking it should be different or thinking it shouldn't be different or anything.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to mention that just came to my mind is that it's very easy to become seduced into the energy that is around you, and which is I don't think it doesn't feel like it's radiance, and even though it is, because that's all there is, but still you get sucked into this energy that's around you, and it's like you just kind of get sucked into it, and it's like sometimes you can't get out of it, and you have to maybe change your energetic whatever, and that's kind of interesting how that happens.
Yeah, it is. It's fascinating, and you'll find phenomena like that happening, and you'll find yourself motivated to cope with it in some various ways, or to adjust something, or to change something, or to change your circumstances, or whatever. And all of that can happen in various ways that it does happen. And yet, when all of that does happen, it's still just the radiance shining.
Yeah.
The radiance is doing every portion of that, every aspect of that.
Yeah, it's almost like I find myself starting to navigate my energy.
You'll find you have a lot, even though from one point of view you can't do anything, from another point of view, you have a lot of latitude, and you have a lot of ability to navigate, to be with your energy in different ways that feels very different, and that brings about different kinds of functionality.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just practically speaking, you can discover this. When you're with the energy itself, you notice it, and you notice that you can be with it. You have sort of alternatives of ways to be with it, different ways of positioning yourself in it, so to speak.
Yeah.
And exactly what any of this means, of course, can't be pinned down, but nonetheless, practically speaking, it's something you can discover.
Well, it's almost like following, it's something that, it's hard to articulate it, but it's almost like I feel myself just kind of moving in some, moving towards the light, as it were.
Yeah,
it
sure.
feels like that,
Yeah.
And it's I can't.
Yeah. Well, the radiance, the transcendental aspect of the radiance, it has power, and that power gives essentially what might be called magical powers or cities or something. It gives the ability to, when you orient yourself more to the radiance, you find yourself having more, being less stuck in your circumstances and having more ability to sort of go where you want to go and stuff. Yeah. And again, this is really hard to pin down, but it's true. The radiance itself it gives blessings. It is powerful. It gives grace. It gives opportunity. It gives luck. It gives alternatives. It gives options. As an aspect, or you could say a side effect of its liberation, of its liberating quality, as it gives unstuckness, not just theoretically but practically as well. Yeah. So you find yourself within circumstances where you feel like you have more options, you feel like you're less locked in, you feel like you're not a victim of your circumstances, but all of a sudden you discover that you're actually not stuck and embedded in things at all, and in a practical sense you can actually enact that to a degree, because the radiance has power, it has force, it has a kind of a blessing, a grace to it.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Radiance is following the radiance.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, radiance is not just inert. It's not just a light, like that's shining mechanically. It is pure intelligence. It's pure being. It's pure self. Yeah. It's pure. It's an astounding potency on every level. It's not just mechanical or inert or lifeless or an elemental like this stuff. Yeah. On the contrary, it's profoundly an agency.
Well, experientially, you start noticing that there is no that the judgments aren't coming up, and that you don't feel sucked into an energy anymore. That you're more like a kayaker on a stream, and you're simply flowing, and you can see. There's a kind of maneuverability by slight shifting. You no longer, these notions of being sucked into something, they don't happen anymore. They don't occur. There's no way to relate to it that way anymore. It's just like it's all your experience, and so.
Yeah.
Was to be sucked at by, and there's no interpretation anymore because it's all your experience.
Yeah. And there's also a profound empowerment.
You
with
feel
that.
it.
Yeah, you feel an empowerment that is actual, that is forceful. It's effective. Yeah.
I would say that it seems to me you're even more so in the driver's seat.
Sure.
And
in a way.
Yeah.
In a way, yeah.
Sure.
That's true.
So all of the, let's see, I'll talk about people, but the people, I mean, I'm around so many people every day at my workplace, and people just seem to be, or energy, their energy just seems to be just real heavy, dense energy.
Yeah.
And I just sometimes wonder, where are they? They must be stuck somewhere in their evolution.
Yeah. Well, the vast majority of people are relatively immature spiritually, so they are very much embedded in ignorance, embedded in misinterpretation, embedded in confusion, which generates all sorts of argumentativeness and anger and frustration and stuckness and stupidity and lack of flexibility. And that will be obviously the dominant flavor of being around people like that, and again the vast majority of people are like that more or less these days, it seems. Yeah. Of course it is all radiance, but radiance can be in that mode. Yeah. Radiance can be with itself immaturely, and then you see these phenomena showing up with that kind of characteristics.
Yeah, but even in that, the analogy of being floating on a river, these people, you could say they're like those rocks that are in the way. You find yourself maneuvering right around them without them being an impediment. They're just simply an energy type that's present in your experience.
The more you're with the radiance, the more you'll be able to go circles around them and not stuck by them.
Yeah.
When you let yourself be with your experience in relatively stupid, relatively ignorant modes like they are, you will find yourself stuck and drawn down into those same kinds of stupid interactions that are relatively unfunctional. But the more you're with the radiance, the more you will discover you have flexibility, you have intelligence, you have artfulness, you have kind of random access to possibilities and to alternatives that is very freeing and gives you a much greater effectiveness in practically speaking, in situations.
Yeah. So we were talking about focus earlier, and I'm gonna have to listen to that part again on the tape because I didn't really get it, but it almost feels like there's some kind of focus, as it were, when you start to feel that radiance, and I mean, it seems to feel like a focus in a way.
Yeah.
I guess it's not really. It's just kind of,
going
downstream now.
Yeah, I would call that more orientation than focus.
Okay.
Focus is what I mean, in terms of my particular arbitrary terminology.
Yeah.
Focus is what I was talking about, the tendency of experience to localize or to orient itself around particularities within an experiential field.
Yeah.
So like within your field of vision, you'll tend to be looking at something or other, and your dead focus will sort of be dancing around and so on. Same with thought, sound, like if you're sitting at lunch in a restaurant and there's lots of conversations around, you will tend to go to one or another of them, or tend to go to the music, or generally on a more or less dynamic basis. Mm-hmm. So I was calling that focus. Mm-hmm. But then more profoundly, in terms of your orientation to your energy, the more you are going with radiance, sort of feeling radiance as your point of orientation rather than circumstances as your point of orientation. That's what empowers you. That's what gives. That's what tends to draw you towards realization. It tends to draw you towards liberation. It tends to draw you towards being unstuck and being more real, more engaged with what you actually are, and less engaged with delusion and misinterpretations of what you actually are.
Yeah, it's almost like feeling your way, to the radiance.
Yeah. Or if you're underwater drowning, sort of finding out where up is. It's, up is there, air is there, I can get to air, it's right up there. So you're going towards the oxygen, you're going towards the air, rather than just sort of flailing around and not knowing where you are, not knowing what you are. I mean, it's wonderful that it's that simple. Just, discover the radiance to any degree, orient yourself towards it, see it to whatever extent you can, as often as you can in any and all circumstances, and that alone is the entirety of the spiritual path. Right there. That alone goes the distance. That alone goes to absolute liberation, absolute realization. Just that one very, very, very simple technique. The yoga of radiant presence.
Yep.
Pinkness of it. It's just really pretty. Soft and subtle.
Nice.
I didn't want you to miss that.
You can kind of see a vibration out there.
Hmm?
You can kind of see a vibration out there.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh, gee.
Yeah. I mean, you can see vibration anywhere, but again, if you don't worry about it. Just see it where you can. And the more you see it anywhere, you'll become more sensitive to it, and you'll start to see it in more different modes. I mean, that's the nice thing about radiance. You don't need to... It's not serial. You don't need to see it here and then, okay, check that off your list, and then see it here, and then see it here, see it. See it anywhere that you can find it, and just that alone will sensitize you to it, and you'll spontaneously start seeing it more and more and more until your experience is full and you see that there's nothing but. But you don't need to, it's not like, oh, I've got that, now I have to go over here. It's not like something you have to accumulate a bunch of different versions of. Just see it once anywhere, stay with that, sensitize yourself to that, and that alone is sufficient, and it will spontaneously spread to include all other aspects where you haven't spontaneously seen it or noticed it or to the same degree or whatever. So it's very easy.
Just one other comment, it seems like there's a moment where you see that, you're looking at the radiance, but the moment you see you are the radiance yourself, you are transcendent yourself, and so it's like, okay,
Yeah.
It's like you don't have to like bird dog it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't care what it does.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's what liberation consists of. You get that this is it, and it can't not be it. So it's not delicate. It doesn't need to be preserved. You don't need to remember it. You don't need to keep going to it. You don't need to cling to. Oh yeah, let me stay with it. It's not like that. Just who gives a shit? Because it is radiance. It's always radiance, and it'll be radiance whatever you do or don't do. However spacey you get or don't, it just doesn't matter.
And no matter what it says, it's not going to reach you. Yeah. I mean, in a certain way.
Yeah, because it is transcendent. You are transcendent, and it is that whatever happens, and it's not delicate. It's not precious. You don't need to preserve it and tiptoe around it for fear that you're going to lose it or knock it down or damage it. It's not like that. It's bulletproof.
Yeah.
It can't not be like that. You couldn't make it not like that if you tried.
Right.
So once you get that, it's like, oh, who gives a shit? All of a sudden it's like, oh.
Yeah.
It just is that. It just happens to be that, whether you like it or not. I mean, which fortunately is kind of a nice thing.
Yeah.
But it is that, and you get that that's the case profoundly, and it just...
And I am that.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, that's what there is. That's this. Yeah. This is that. And there's no alternative. There's nothing else happening. And then so that's just absolutely, it's untouchable. It's unchangeable. It's not. It doesn't need to be. It doesn't require anything. Yeah. Or not. It just doesn't matter at that point.
Yeah, I see that idea that you don't have a dog in the fight is clearer and clearer.
Yeah.
Hey. Good.
Yeah. Whatever happens, it's cool. It's just going to be this. Whatever happens, it's still going to be this, and that's, that's all that matters.
Yeah. Invulnerability.
Yeah. It's totally invulnerable, because it can't not be like it is. It is like it is. It can't not be that. You are that, so it's not delicate. It's not like, everything will be okay as long as I do such and such, or as long as such and such. It's not like that. It's just, it is what it is. It doesn't matter what happens,
Right. Yeah.
It's not. It's just completely insensitive. It's completely undelicate. It's it's bulletproof. You can blow up atom bombs and it doesn't give a shit. It's not going to damage this adamantine transcendence. And that's why it's liberating, because what it is does not depend on anything. It doesn't depend on anything being any certain way or not. It just doesn't depend on anything. It's absolutely independently transcendent. And that just is the case, whether you like it or not. So. But it fortunately turns out to be kind of a nice thing. Hard to argue with. But nonetheless, even if it sucked, even if the human horrific fantasy of the human condition was true, that's just how it would be, and that's just reality. But it happens that that's not the case, and this is just how it happens to be. It's just reality. But it can't not be that. You know, it doesn't need to be asserted or believed in or maintained or supported or anything. It's absolutely independent of. It doesn't matter what happens. It just is like that. That's just how it is, and it's not. It can't be other than that.
Yeah, regardless of how it appears to be happening.
Yeah, it can't not be transcendent. It can't happen. It can't happen. There's no way you can make this not transcendent. So, it's a pretty powerful fact. It turns out. And when you get that that's the case, it's a way you get to take advantage of it. It's like, oh, okay, I get it. I'm transcendent. Like it or not, I didn't try to be. I didn't plan to be. It's kind of nice, but even that's so. It just happens to be the case, and it's undeniable, and it's objectively how it is. And it's quitting time. I wish our online friends good night.